So the next step would be starter. This is the feed that is it's a pelleted option here at Matthews. 22% protein, 6% fat, 3.5% fiber, 1/6 lysine. So as you can see, we're kind of dropping down, some of the protein and some of the lysine there in this particular feed. We like to refer to starter as the feed to feed when you need to see more muscle, right? When you, especially on some of those pures, right, that just need to have a little harder shape, need to see a little more shape as you get up on top of them, maybe need to get them a little more sale ready, maybe like a little quicker than maybe some of like the 803 option, which is going to give a little more bloom and a little more bulk. Starter itself is going to be the more aggressive option within our lineup when it comes to getting those baby pigs ready to sell.
Yeah, and so I always tell people the range on starter, and again, as we talk through this, we've got a couple different options also in a meal option available through Matthews as well. If you want to make a meal feed with a custom order or whatever it may be, I'm sure you guys have a 1 ton minimum on most of those things in general. And if you have any questions, definitely please feel free to chat with Brant and Amanda. I don't want to put any words in their mouth, so make sure it doesn't affect them from a production perspective. But even if we are going to run a meal feed eventually, I think very early on in a post-weaning pig, I think we get along better with pellets. And so even if I told myself, man, I've got a bulk bin sitting outside and I really want to utilize the bulk bin and I want to run meal feed, I'm still going to run starter pellets for at least a week. And the reason is those pigs, they're not mature enough to really work the feeders that aggressively to get the feed to flow as good as it needs to. That pellet's going to be dry and it's going to flow through those feeders quite a bit better. And early on in that young pig's life, we don't want to see them with an out of feed experience because it's going to affect them long term. So I always think of everything. If you're going to hit a road bump somewhere in this whole process, if you hit that road bump early, it's still going to set you back at the end. And so we want to make sure that we don't have any negativity as we navigate through that system. And so we will go pre-starter for 4 to 5 days and then go into starter pellets, and we feed solely starter pellets in the nursery. That's what we do at our place. So whether those pigs are going to be in the nursery for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, they're going to be on starter no matter what at that point in time. And we will have some of those pigs that are very aggressive in terms of shape and muscle coming out of that type scenario, but they're easy to calm down. So I don't really worry about it at that stage. What I am particularly concerned at that stage is that, again, we feed to the smaller pig in that group. And so I don't want to leave one behind just worrying about the top pigs in there or the bigger ones in there. And so we solely will do that. I always tell people a range on how many bags of starter pellets you need if you're not going to go to a starter meal, about 2 to 5 bags per 10 pigs, roughly. If you have a tremendous amount of shape and muscle in your pigs, or if you're working with a bunch of crossbred stuff that are maybe pushing the envelope from a genetic standpoint, maybe you've tried to swing for the fence really hard and make the most extreme animals, they probably don't need to eat starter as long. If you've tried to play it a little safer maybe and your animals are maybe a little later maturing, they're a little bigger, they're a little longer, they're not going to peak as early, you may need to stay on starter pellets just a little bit longer at that juncture. So I would tell you, let the pigs tell you, visually what they need, and they'll do that based on muscle, based on expression. If you go too long on starter pellets, generally what you will see is a lot of muscle, a lot of shape, and some of those may be a little drier bodied and maybe just a little tighter from a skeletal standpoint. They'll come out of it in a week once they go on to something else. So it's not really any long-term negativity from that perspective, but if you do have some smaller ones that are still behind the 8 ball, that are still a little green and they're still a little later maturing, and if you switch a feed on those animals, you're going to set them back another week. And so to me, it's easier to navigate through the ones that need to calm down a little bit rather than the ones that need to hurry up a shot.
Well, and in some cases, genetically or even depending on your operation, you could sell baby pigs right off a starter. There's no rule that says that you can't sell baby pig. We do it all the time. It happens all the time. So it's more around, to me, longevity and how long they need to be on starter, because like the way that I've told people is once you walk in there that day and you're like, man, things are getting just a little, like we're a little wide, right? Like we got a little much. That's kind of the tipping point in my mind to say like, okay, now it's time to maybe back down a little bit, drop our protein, or it could even be a volume, issue where, maybe that pig is just standing at the feeder eating too much. I mean, there's going to be some situations where you might have to hand feed. You might need to slow them down. You maybe don't need to have them that self feeder and they're just, standing at the feeder all day long. I mean, there's going to be some scenarios where those things don't need to be at a self feeder all day, with the full one anyway.
Again, that will come, CTC Denigard and Mecadox as an option there from a medication standpoint. Obviously, the Mecadox does not require a VFD. CTC Denigard would. I guess I'm a little old school. I know some places that have water medicators really like to do their medication through water. That's fantastic. I do think that sometimes when you water medicate, you don't get as much actual water intake. And so I personally like to have some of that medication embedded in the feed myself, but that's just
do you run a water medicator?
We will eventually. I mean, on occasion, but we don't have to very often.
You're not relying on it.
No,
that's
absolutely not. No,
because it's in the feed.
Yep.
Makes sense.
But again, in a meal option, again, if you had pressure or had need to run a different medication, I've had customers run starter ground with Pulmotil or do some things like that too long term. There are options in the ground version that we don't have access to from a pelleted standpoint, at least with a minimum order. If you call me and say, man, I need Pulmotil in a starter pellet, you're going to have to take 4 ton from Lewisburg. And from a volume standpoint, it's just not a really great option. So, again, if there is something you want to be more specific, we can do some of those things